In December 2017, CME futures launched. Bitcoin peaked and fell by 85% over the next year. In January 2020, CME options launched. Bitcoin peaked and fell by 50% over the next 3 months. In April 2021, Coinbase had its IPO. Bitcoin peaked and fell by 50% over the next 3 months. And again, in October 2021, Bitcoin Futures ETF was launched. Bitcoin peaked and fell by 75% over the next year. Bitcoin loves to top on big headlines, right at the moment where everyone is absolutely convinced that the stars are aligned for Bitcoin to move higher. That is precisely the moment where it begins to crash. Now, in 2025, Trump is back in office, and the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve has just been made official. But instead of pushing Bitcoin to new highs, the price topped just one day after Trump was inaugurated on January 20th. Since then, Bitcoin has dropped more than 25%. Momentum has faded, and sentiment has turned pessimistic. So the big question now is whether the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, or more broadly, Trump, just another sell the news event. A large part of the disappointment following the Strategic Reserve announcement actually comes from one key detail. The US government isn't buying more Bitcoin, they're simply holding what they have already seized. In fact, the BBC called this reserve a pig in lipstick, or in other words, a flashy announcement that masks the fact that nothing new is actually happening. But we don't completely agree with the BBC. Even without new buying, this is still one of the most important long-term shifts we've seen for Bitcoin. This is the first time the US has officially recognized Bitcoin as a strategic national asset, providing it a lot of credibility. That in itself sends a strong message. If the world's largest economy sees Bitcoin as a strategic investment, what's stopping others from adding it now? And we're already seeing signs of that. Saudi Arabia's sovereign fund has accumulated 4,678 Bitcoin, nearly 5% of its portfolio. And Wisconsin's pension fund just added 3,442 Bitcoin, about 1% of total assets. That's institutional scale buying in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And this could just be the start. BlackRock is already pushing Bitcoin to all their clients. Their latest report, Sizing Bitcoin in Portfolios, recommends a 1 to 2% allocation to Bitcoin. Now, that might sound small at first, but the potential price impact could prove massive in the coming years. Total global wealth sits around $900 trillion across assets like stocks, real estate, and gold. This figure is effectively Bitcoin's total addressable market. If just 2% flows into Bitcoin, its market cap would balloon to $18 trillion. That puts Bitcoin's price north of $850,000 per coin. So from a demand perspective, the strategic reserve is long-term bullish. It adds credibility and invites follow-through from other big players.